Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to the Dragons of Nightmare in the Emerald Nightmare.
Yes, this is a council style encounter where you'll be fighting one main dragon called Yasondra and then 2 out of a possible 3 other dragons, and the 2 dragons that you'll be facing, the other ones at least, they'll be picked randomly at the beginning of the week, so each week that you go in here, it'll be a little bit different. And in this video we're going to be covering all 4 of the dragons, so every time that you come in here you'll know exactly what to do regardless of the combination.
Now how this encounter works with all these dragons in play is that you'll always have Yasondra and you'll have one other dragon on the pool. At 70% health, the other random dragon will just fly up into the air, and the other dragon that's left out of the encounter will then come and join it. At 40% health, the non-Yasondra dragons will just swap again, and then at 0%, well, the fight is over because they're all dead.
Yeah, the main thing you just need to take away from it, of course, is that you shouldn't bother trying to attack the dragon up in the air. It's completely immune to damage and everything, and I think it's probably out of range anyway, so don't bother trying to attack that and just deal with the dragons as they come to you.
Now, all of these dragons have shared mechanics. They all have a breath, which needs to be faced away from the raid, and they all have a tail swipe, so you need to make sure that you're not stood behind them. But the main thing you need to know about these dragons is that they have an aura. Now, on Heroic, this aura is supposed to be a 45-yard range. It's not. On Normal and on Heroic right now, it's a 35-yard range. If you're stood inside this aura, you get a stacking debuff. These debuffs do a very, very small amount of ticking damage. However, if they ever reach 10 stacks, you become stunned for 30 whole seconds, which is almost a guaranteed wipe if this hits the majority of your raid. So to counter this, you want to split your raid into 2 groups, have one group on the right hand side of the room, one group on the left hand side of the room, make sure the dragons are spread apart, and as soon as your groups go to around 7 stacks, get your tanks to swap the dragons over. And providing you consistently do that throughout the entire fight, you will never be stunned. And apart from the breath, the tail swipe, and the aura, the bosses don't share any other abilities. Everything else they have is unique. Now, all the abilities that they do have don't really combo with each other, and instead you simply just need to understand how they work in order to deal with them. And if you can deal with them, this fight is a piece of cake. But let's go through all the dragons just so you can get your head round them.
So first off, let's look at Yasondra, who is the dragon you will always be facing every single week, and she'll be with you throughout the entire encounter. Her most impactful ability is Nightmare Blast. What she'll do is lob a bolt at a player, which will deal some damage to them and knock them back, but most importantly it will spawn a Nightmare Bloom flower. This will last for 1 minute and it will continuously spawn a bunch of ads out of it, and these ads are really irritating because 1, they're ads and you have to switch off the bosses, but on Heroic especially they have an aura around them that reduces the damage you deal by 50%, so these ads are a huge pain in the ass. However, if you have a player stood within the flower, instead of any ads spawning, that player will just take ticking damage instead. So to counter the flower, every single time one spawns, just have a player stood within it, while the healer just spot heals them. That way you'll be completely free of ads and doing full damage to the boss. On top of this, she'll do something named called Defile Spirit. This will root a player and anyone within 8 yards of them, and then it will place a giant shadowy circle that will explode on them shortly afterwards. So what you need to do is dispel the root on the player so that they can move out of the shadowy circle on the ground. If there's a lot of players all stood on top of each other and they all get rooted, I hope you have a lot of dispels or a master spell or some sort of way of freeing yourself, because otherwise you kind of fuck yourself over a little bit and someone's going to be caught out. So just make sure that you are spread out 8 yards so that when the root does come in, it will only affect one player.
And that's all you need to know about Yasondra. Let's talk about Emerus. Now, Emerus will apply players with a debuff called Volatile Infection. This debuff lasts for a very long time, is not dispellable, and simply just makes this player do ticking damage to themselves and then anyone within 10 yards of them. If you get this debuff, make sure you move out the raid. And healers, you just need to make sure you keep these targets up. Emerus will also spawn 2 blob ads. Now, these ads need to be picked up by your tank, and they need to be interrupted when they start casting their corruption ability. This corruption ability does a huge amount of damage if it actually goes off, so to make it even easier for yourselves, just have any nearby DPS, so the DPS that are on that particular side of the room, immediately switch them and kill them off as soon as you can. Now, one thing we didn't mention about the non-Yasondra dragons, on Heroic mode and above, they do abilities while they're up in the air. While Emerus is up in the air, he places a passive on every single enemy that's in the encounter that makes it that when they die, they simply just spawn a mushroom. And the mushroom is very similar to the ones that you've seen in Dark Heart Thicket, so don't stand near them, otherwise they're going to explode in your face and you're not going to like it.
That's all Emerus does. Let's have a look at Lethon. He'll be constantly spawning a bunch of shadow circles around himself that you just need to move out of. It's pretty simple, but one very important mechanic that you need to deal with is Siphon Spirit. What he will do is spawn a bunch of spirit ads on top of the players in the group furthest from him. These ads will now slowly start going across the encounter area, towards Lethon, and if they reach him, they will heal him, and of course that heals all of them because they have a shared health pool. So you need to kill off these adds as soon as you possibly can. They can be gripped, they can be stunned, they can be slowed, knockback, all of that kind of stuff. You want to use it, switch to them, and kill them as soon as you possibly can. Now on Heroic, when Lethon is airborne, he will use something called Shadow Burst. This will just cause a player to place a debuff on the 3 nearest players to them. This debuff just deals ticking damage and slows them for 21 seconds, and this can stack up. It's not a huge deal, it does very little damage, and the movement speed slows like 10%. If your stacks happen to go stupidly high, then just make sure you move away from someone who is going to burst, but generally speaking you can ignore this ability.
And the last dragon you may well see is Terra, but unfortunately this week, in the very first Heroic week, he wasn't up. We did however do quite a lot of testing on this guy in the very late stages of beta, so we're going to share those experiences with you now, just to give you an idea of how he might work in a couple of weeks time whenever he shows his face. So the main ability that this guy does is that he'll spawn shadow copies of themselves. These shadow copies don't do anything apart from a breath, just like the boss. So the tank's going to be taking extra damage when these breaths come in. Again, just make sure you're facing them away from the raid. He'll also be sending out seeping fog, which slowly moves around the room. If you stand inside this fog, you're put to sleep for 6 seconds and you'll take a load of ticking damage. So just make sure you don't stand in it. However, if someone does mess up, you can flat out just dispel it and the effect is removed. Now, whilst Terra is airborne, he seems to be the most aggressive out of all of them, because he'll cast an ability that fears your entire raid for 3 seconds. Now, this is your proper, solid Warlock fear. Everyone will just run around in different directions, but it appears it is dispellable. So, if you want your Holy Paladins to bubble and then dispel your tank to prevent the bosses from moving everywhere, then you could definitely do that. But do be prepared to pick up any of the adds that are going to spawn out of the Nightmare Bloom flowers, because all of those players are no longer going to be stood inside them. And that's everything you need to know about this encounter. So as we said at the start, I mean, it's very simple. You just need to understand all these individual abilities and how to deal with them. But while you're actually doing the boss, although it sounds like there's quite a lot to remember, the majority of it's self-explanatory. Don't stand in the AoE circles. Make sure you stand in the flower so adds don't spawn. And if any adds spawn at any point, kill them off.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a good ad in this fight. You need to
and of
kill
course
them all
swap on 7 stacks.
Yes.
That's very important. If you manage to nail that down, you won't have any issues with this boss whatsoever.
So thank you very much for watching, and before we let you go, make sure to check out our sponsored Discord. Discord is a service where you can make your own server for your friends or your guild, and where you can make voice communication and text channels, and it is entirely free. We have our own community FatBoss Discord server where you can come along and talk about raiding or our videos or just generally chill with us. We're in there quite a lot at the moment, so do come check it out. The link is in the description. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for their continued support. You guys are absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for watching. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching.